Before unleashing his forces on Veii, Camillus offered a prayer to the gods. For his help in this assault, Apollo was promised 1/10 of all plunder looted from the city. But in the commotion that ensued, the soldiers failed to fulfill that promise. Returning to the city, Camillus ordered all soldiers to hand over 1/10 of their plunder. The Romans knew better than to insult the gods, and with a heavy heart, they obliged. When Camillus then proclaimed that 1/10 of all seized land would also be devoted to the gods, the citizens felt that this was a step too far, and they revolted against him. Rather than facing an embarrassing trial, Camillus abandoned the city and went into exile, but not before offering another prayer to the gods. If he was suffering wrongfully as an innocent man, they should make his ungrateful countrymen regret his departure. The Celts, or as the Romans preferred, the Gauls, were a group of Indo-European peoples situated in Central Europe. Beginning in the 6th century BCE, they began moving south over the Alps. They settled in the Po Valley, squeezing the Etruscans out in the process. In the Roman world, this area would later be known as Cisalpine Gaul, or Gaul on this side of the Alps. Surviving Roman descriptions of the Celts don't paint them in a favorable light. They were seen as savages lacking taste for finer things. Uncultured and undisciplined, they gorged themselves on food and drink. Their simple lives consisted of only war and agriculture. On the other hand, archaeological evidence shows that the Celts had extraordinary skill when it comes to metalwork and crafts. Alongside beautifully crafted objects, some technological innovations, like iron horseshoes, could be found. The Celts were unarguably fierce warriors. Their traditions of applying war paint and screaming battle cries while charging down the enemy line would terrify any army unlucky enough to face them. In 391 BCE, reports of a large Gallic party moving south reached Rome. Envoys were sent to investigate these rumors. The Sanons, led by Brennus, were encamped near Clusium, ready for battle. The story goes that the tribes were lured by large quantities of wine stored in the city. The diplomatic means were unsuccessful, but seeing Rome was in great danger from these barbarians, the envoys fought side by side with Clusian defenders. This was perceived as a great insult. Diplomatic nature of the mission strictly forbids the envoys from intervening in foreign affairs. The Gauls retreated from the battle and set their sights on Rome. They sent a request for the envoys to be surrendered, but in their endless wisdom, the Romans chose to elect them as military tribunes. Furious, Brennus decided to march on Rome. This is the official story. However, there is some evidence to show that the Sanons were mercenaries financed by the tyrant of Syracuse, Dionysius. They were ordered to occupy Rome while he dealt with their ally Messina. In any case, an army of angry Gauls, approximately 30,000 strong, was on its way to Rome. Great panic ensued in Rome. Their best general was exiled and the army unprepared. It is estimated that 2 legions, or around 12,000 men, were levied, making this the biggest Roman army so far. They marched out of the city and met the Gauls near a small river Alia. Having considerably less men, the Roman commanders had to stretch the line to avoid encirclement. More experienced, heavily armored troops were placed in the center, while the poorly equipped men were on the flanks. The line was stretched far too thinly, and the Roman resolve broke almost immediately after making contact with the enemy. The flanks flew into a complete rout, leaving the center to be encircled and slayed. Most of the force fled to abandoned ruins of Veii, while a small band of men from the right flank bolted straight for Rome. Terrified, they left the walls unguarded, and the city gates wide open behind them. Those citizens that didn't flee from the city followed the soldiers to the citadel on the Capitoline hill and barricaded themselves inside. When the Gauls reached the city, they were perplexed by the lack of any defense on the walls. They believed that the Romans set up a trap for them inside and refused to enter for an entire day. When a scouting party reported that there was no trap whatsoever, they entered the city and surrounded the citadel. Seeing there is no way for them to dislodge the Romans, they settled for a lengthy siege and began looting the city. Everything that wasn't firmly secured to the ground was taken away. A fire was started inside the city. It raged on for days and indiscriminately destroyed large portions of the city. The Gauls would periodically send out raiding parties into the countryside. There they encountered Camillus, who was living at Ardea. His small force of Latins was more than a match for unprepared raiders, and they were easily defeated. As days turned into months, both sides began to suffer. The Romans inside the citadel were starving, and the Gauls, accustomed to low temperatures of northern Europe, started dying from the heat. Disease was running rampant both inside and outside of the citadel. In these miserable times, another legendary figure of early Roman legend emerged. During the siege, a large number of Romans were gathering in Veii. Only thing they were missing now was a capable military commander, and they decided to summon Camillus from his banishment. But, being sticklers for the law, they first needed approval from the Senate. The only problem was that they were still trapped inside the citadel. A young soldier volunteered himself to sneak into the citadel and request permission from the senators. He found a steep rock that was left unguarded and climbed into the citadel. After hearing the man out, the senators agreed to acquit Camillus and nominate him dictator. The soldier left the citadel the same way he entered, but unfortunately he was spotted scaling the walls. In the dead of night, a Gallic party was sent up that way. This would have spelled disaster if it weren't for the sacred geese of Juno, who abided at the top of the Capitoline. The geese were disturbed by the Gauls, and the clamor they produced awoke Marcus Manlius, later named Capitolinus, for his defense of the Capitoline. He sprung into action and successfully defended the walls, until he was joined by the rest of the garrison. Famine began to take its toll. The guards grew so weak that they were unable to hold their arms while on duty. Eventually, it was agreed that the Romans would pay 1,000 pounds of gold to the Gauls so they would leave the city. While measuring the gold, tribunes noticed that the scale was tampered with and objected. In response, Brennus threw his sword onto the scale and proclaimed, "Woe to the vanquished." While the Gauls were packing up the gold and preparing to leave, Camillus appeared with his forces. In the battle that ensued, Roman victory was so complete that not a single Gaul survived to tell the story. It's interesting that surviving Roman retellings of these events were altered with this divine intervention from Camillus. This sack left Romans traumatized and in fear of Gauls, until Julius Caesar defeated them 350 years later. This event was so prominent in the Roman imagination that when the Emperor Claudius filled the Senate with Gauls in 48 CE, they were compared with Brennus and his marauders. From this day forth, Rome entered an unprecedented era. In an ancient world full of warfare, cities would be captured and recaptured multiple times. But among them, one city, the Eternal City, stood above the rest. Numerous enemies entered the Italian peninsula with the singular goal of taking the city, but they were always unsuccessful. It wasn't until mighty Alaric and his Visigoths 850 years later that the city would finally be taken again. For all the physical damage Rome had suffered on that day, the psychological toll was far greater. Perception of invulnerability that lasted from the days of the early Republic was shattered. Traditional Roman historians dated the first sack of Rome to 390 BC. They used magisterial action records that were often incomplete. When modern historians cross-referenced more accurate Greek records, they concluded that the sack happened in 387 or 386 BCE. Although the date of the sack is still uncertain, this event marks a turning point in Roman history. Most, if not all, historical records were lost in the fire. Stories that were passed down to us were retold and reimagined many times before they were finally written down. We have now covered the period of historical legends, and the stories we tell from now on will mostly be based on facts. From this low point, the Romans would quickly recover and again challenge for regional dominance. Join us next time as we discuss the second founding of Rome.